So it looks like we've got a new alliance between two major cartels. This video here just came out a couple days ago and is showing a group of gunmen stating the reports of an alliance between Los Chapitos and CJNG. So to talk about that, we brought on today Stefano Rittendale of All Source News and the Chief Intelligence Officer for Arturius. We had Stefano on a couple weeks ago, an awesome resource to break down anything cartel related. He's got a new YouTube channel, a new TikTok channel, and a new Instagram account. Be sure to follow all those as well as Arturius in the description below. But with that, let's head to the conversation. All right, Stefano, welcome back. Thank you so much for taking the time, man. A lot of positive feedback last time around, so I'm looking forward to this.
No, Preston, thank you again so much for having me. I mean, it's really cool to be back here so quick, and I appreciate all the listeners who love the feedback. It meant a lot.
All right, and they're going to all go follow your new YouTube channel. It's linked below. Build that subscriber base up. But
Thank you.
When we were texting just a couple days ago, you said, yeah, it's a good time because there's a new alliance, and you likened it to ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which is never a good thing, but what's going on? What is this alliance you're talking about?
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of like you always try to figure out, okay, what is the comparisons, right? So people can kind of grasp, especially like in a situation with cartels, and there's so many, and in the factions, it's hard. And so this alliance is Los Chapitos, which are the sons of El Chapo, have decided to make an alliance with the Jalisco New Generation cartel, right? And there was rumors of this, and more than rumors, there was a lot of like already narco banners, talks. Like it was pretty okay. A lot of it was more of a when they were going to announce it. And during the weekend, it was the official announcement. They went on video. They announced it, and how they said it was, something along the lines like, we're the Menchos people and we're the Ivan's people, like, and Ivan Archivaldo's leader, Los Chapitos, and Menchos, the leader of Jalisco New Generation. And so made this public alliance. Historically, when we were talking about kind of the rumors, there was a lot of messaging that they kind of called themselves Fuerza Especiales Unión, which is like the Union Special Forces. We don't really know if that's going to be the official name or what they're going, but it's pretty clear that this is happening. And there was a couple of signs that this was coming. Number one, I did see an increase in kind of talking to people. There was an increase of CJNG activity in Sonora. Specifically in areas where the Chapitos were operating. But kind of number two, the funny one for me, or like the key one, was I started noticing CJNG social media accounts pushing Chapito propaganda. And I'm like, okay, all right. I mean, if you're pushing their propaganda, it's pretty clear that you have this. And why it's such a big deal. I mean, people forget, but a lot of the brothers who made this alliance with Jalisco New Generation years ago, they were actually kidnapped by the Jalisco New Generation cartel. Like two of I know Jesus Alfredo, and then possibly even Ivan Archivaldo himself as well. They were kidnapped years ago by the Jalisco New Generation cartel when El Chapo was in jail in Puerto Vallarta, and they were in prison. I mean, they were captured and kidnapped for a couple of days, and it took direct negotiation apparently from like the senior leader of the Sinaloa cartel back then, Mayo Zambada, and even El Chapo directly to get them released. Right. And so the people that kidnapped them are now making an alliance with them. And that kind of shows the desperation they had, because right now, Ivan Archivaldo, his biggest concern and threat is not the Jalisco New Generation cartel. It's the Mayito Flacos, who we kind of talked about in the civil war that they're going on. And so, the Jalisco New Generation benefits from this alliance because it kind of expands their area of operation, specifically in Sinaloa and Sonora. And then for the Chapitos, it gives them a chance to survive because they were losing a lot of key factions underneath them. And clearly they were losing territory. And then they were even opening other fronts with other kind of loosely affiliated organizations with the Sinaloa cartel, or back then, or even the BLO, which was called Chapo Isidro. So Chapo Isidro was operating in northern Sinaloa. He had a huge fight with one of the key lieutenants of Los Chapitos in northern Sinaloa. Now you have the Mayito Flacos coming down south, pushing also there. And so, the Chapitos like, we need this alliance. And then how did Los Mayito Flacos respond? It's pretty clear now that they entered into an alliance with the group I mentioned earlier, Chapo Isidro, right? They entered into an alliance, right? So now we're starting to see this dynamic kind of quickly change the situation on the ground. And what that really translates is, violence that's already been pretty high in Sinaloa is probably even going to get higher.
Is it safe to call this like a consolidation of power? Like there were 20 groups and it became 15 and that could become 10, 5, and so on?
That's a fascinating question. And that's something that, like, in my mind, I've been debating. right? Because you do like this isn't unprecedented in Mexican cartel history, right? I mean, we saw that with Michoacan back then when the Zetas were a threat. We saw that with the formation of Carteles Unidos, which the DEA threat assessment was published a couple of days ago, indicated like Carteles Unidos is basically La Familia Michoacana, and a lot of the groups that kind of operate under in that area and under the Carteles Unidos, because there were all these different kind of groups, and they kind of formed, and they're fighting the Jalisco New Generation cartel there because it's kind of this necessity. And I think that's something that we might see now, right? Is this idea of all these different groups kind of forming their alliances to kind of face off whatever bigger threat they view. So the fact that the Jalisco New Generation cartel entered into an alliance with los Chapitos, now we're seeing Mayito Flaco with Chapo Isidro. The question is, does that then expand to other regions? I don't think so, because kind of where the Mayito Flacos are kind of focusing on is not necessarily, that much of there's not other groups. Like Mayito Flaco's two enemies, Los Chapitos and Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Like that's their main, and then kind of by extension, La Línea in Chihuahua, but La Línea already has a very deep-seated connection with Jalisco New Generation. So there is possibilities maybe that the Mayito Flacos might try to find other groups. But to your point, yes, we're starting to see this consolidation because the violence, and it's the necessity is, a lot of people were, before this alliance was formed, I was having a conversation with a couple of reporters on the background, and there was this idea, well, why doesn't Chapo Isidro, understand, look, you're done. It's time to like just give up and be kind of, either run away or even maybe turn yourself in or whatever. And I think that kind of misses this idea of how these cartel operates. They need the power. The power gives them basically immunity in a way, right? And that's the mindset they have. Like the weaker you get, the more likely people are going to go after you. So
Sure.
it forces you to be more powerful, either to kind of get the sense of impunity or, more importantly, deterrence. And so I think that's why Chapitos do it, and that's why we're seeing these alliances form, and it would be interesting to see if we see more alliances form down the road, maybe with Mayito Flaco or other organizations with los Chapitos.
Is there a clear top dog between the two that just formed this alliance? Like when I'm thinking of the Al-Qaeda Islamic State piece, depending on the year and the location, like there was kind of one that was calling the shots versus the other. I think of when Islamic State was kind of on the march through Iraq and Syria, they were calling the shots. And Al-Qaeda was just to a degree trying to latch on a little bit to keep their name in the news. What does that look like right now? Is there one clearly above and beyond the other, or are they pretty equal?
No, Jalisco New Generation, without a doubt.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, without a doubt, it's Jalisco New Generation. They're the ones that most have to gain. They're the ones that are going to be calling the shots. I mean, Chapito, Ivan Archibaldo was, I'm not going to say in his last leg standing, but he was pretty done. I mean, it was pretty clear that he was grasping at any possibility of survival, and that's why he did this alliance. Clearly, Jalisco New Generation is going to be calling the shots. When it was first announced, I was talking to kind of somebody on the ground, and he was saying, I'm hearing rumors and kind of the reporting. It looks like it's one faction within the Jalisco New Generation cartel. They're called Los Jardineros. They're based out of Nayarit and Jalisco, which is really kind of close to Sinaloa on that western side. And he said, and that kind of, and we were talking when this was first announced to try to get details, and he was saying, and I was like, that actually makes sense, because there's always been this understanding that Jardinero and Ivan Archibaldo are talking, because there was like a ceasefire between both.
Okay.
Jardinero is fighting Mayito Flaco in Nayarit, etc. But then we got reporting from Luis Chaparro, whose his YouTube channel is called Pie de Nota, phenomenal one, and he kind of had an exclusive reporting, and it's very broad deal, like what the Jalisco New Generation is committed. It's not just one faction; it's across the board, various key factions of the Jalisco New Generation cartel, key leaders of the Jalisco New Generation cartel, and based on his reporting, said they're committing hundreds of fighters to Los Chapitos to fight. But that's the point; like he's the one committing forces to Los Chapitos. He's the one that has the power, and he can basically dictate to Los Chapitos kind of the situation is going and kind of the terms that he needs. So clearly El Mencho is going to gain the most from this alliance.
Was there anything specifically that prompted this? Like an event?
And it's been a long time. The first rumors we heard about this was shortly after the Civil War started within the Sinaloa cartel. That between Mayito Flaco and Los Chapitos. And so we saw kind of these narco banners, etc., chatter going on, and it started to pick up. I mean, it was kind of known And I think a lot of us were waiting for the official announcement. So
Mhm.
until official, people are going to look at the videos like, is this really official? I mean, it was funny. I was talking to kind of a journalist. I was like, well, we're going to get firsthand confirmation. I'm like, I mean, this is it. Like, this is,
Yeah.
you're not going to get more than this. And it's kind of hard to say what kind of triggered this formal announcement. Why now? There were conversations that their name is Los Yucos. It's kind of one of the key groups under Los Chapitos. There was conversations because they have actually a very close family ties, Los Yucos, with Los Chapitos, like even from a family bloodline type of thing. And there was conversations that maybe, because Los Yucos were very clearly Los Chapitos during the Civil War, and there was conversations that they flipped, that they went to the Mayito Flacos because they kind of saw, okay, hey, you're Chapitos, you're done. And oh, by the way, now Chapo Isidro is fighting La Numerada in northern Sinaloa, which is a key leader of those Chapitos. And actually, so the TikTok video you made where you're like, you endorsed my account. That video in the background where that was when Chapo Isidro went in to fight. And that was a big issue because now it's like, okay, Chapo Isidro isn't Mayito Flaco. He's separate. He's a completely different guy. And so you have those Yucos possibly switching sides. Chapo Isidro and Mayito Flaco, now both of them pushing in. And I think maybe it's hard to really say, but maybe that's what forced this announcement, because then maybe Los Chapitos can say to all the other, the sub-lieutenants and lieutenants underneath them, hey, don't switch sides. Look, I got the Jalisco guys on my side. See, now we're the powerful ones. You don't have to go to the Mayito Flacos. I got the Jaliscos. Stay with me because I control this alliance. And if you switch sides, I got the Jalisco guys going after you. And so maybe that's why this video announcement was coming, because I think and oh, by the way, sorry, here's another key thing. Ovidio Guzman, the brother of Ivan Archibaldo, one of the sons of El Chapo as well, who was detained and extradited to the United States, he entered a plea deal with the United States U.S. prosecutors, right? And it looked like that they were using him to be a key witness for the government against Mayo Zambada. Part of that plea deal is 17 members of Ovidio Guzman's family, and by default, El Chapo, the El Chapo's family, were given access to the United States. So we have images of members of Ovidio Guzman's family and El Chapo's family inside the United States. Basically, as part of this plea deal, they were, for all intents and purposes, given asylum. So you had in kind of like a span of 2 weeks, all these major events that I think inside the Chapitos, they were looking at Ivan Archibaldo to be like, yo, man, you're losing control. What's going on? Maybe there was an internal coup or whatever. And he said, maybe now I need this video statement to give me that strength back, as it goes to my earlier point. Cartel leaders need to be powerful, even if it's just per the media. They need this image of strength because it gives them that deterrence. And so that forces them to try to become more and more and more powerful. And that's kind of then at the point, are you too powerful? Then they go after you. And it's kind of that very interesting dynamic. But I think that was the key issue.
That I was going to ask about the 17 family members coming in. That is so messy. Like we say asylum, so asylum for the family members of a cartel leader. That seems dicey. But you got to imagine there's some sort of protection there as well for these family members. If there's some sort of plea deal, that feels so complicated and so messy. Like you can probably point to the reasons why it's a good thing and a bad thing. And I guess that's just kind of the world we live in.
I mean, to be honest, though, I think there's a general understanding in cartel land that if you're in the U.S., you're safe. I mean, for the most part, I'm not going to say 100%, but like, look, I said this a million times. I actually was on a previous podcast. I literally brought up this point, and I was talking to some think tankers about this. And I was like, look, the question I get, and this is to my point, right? It's like the question is like, okay, if the U.S. does something in Mexico, how when will the cartels respond, right? And I was kind of debating, and then I thought to myself, for a second, I was like, well, wait a minute. You have the it's kind of funny, like President Trump gave asylum to these guys, right? It's kind of funny because I look at it as like Biden kidnapped one of the guys. So let me just backtrack, right? He turned one of El Chapo's sons into an informant, got that son to get the most powerful drug lord in Mexican history, probably, I would argue, more powerful than El Chapo, or at least equal as powerful, tricked him, flew them to the U.S., and, the informant, thank you so much for doing this, you're going to jail. here's an indictment. You, even though gave the most powerful drug lord to us, you're not getting asylum. You're going to prison. And then that caused a civil war. And the Biden administration was like, "No, Mexico, that's your problem." The Mexican government was furious. They're like, "Dude, you just caused a civil war." And Biden was like, and Merrick Garland, well, we got the guy. So, that's kind of something that's like, they kidnap Asylum, but whatever. I don't want to get into the politics of it, right? But when Mayo Zambada was taken to the U.S., like the U.S. government kidnapped this guy, right? And so the son of Mayo Zambada took over. And what did he do? He declared war on los Chapitos because one of the El Chapo's son is the one who turned him his father. He didn't go after the United States. Like, if that doesn't trigger a retaliation, like, why wouldn't he, like, let's say, put a car bomb in the U.S. Embassy in Mexico? And if that didn't do it, then really what would? And because that goes to the point, like, that's why these family members go to the United States. And more importantly, that's why when cartel leaders get extradited to the United States, they're done. That's why they fight it. Because at least in a Mexican prison, they maybe be able to continue to have influence and kind of do a lot of the operations in the background, a little bit more harder or easier depending on the prison. But they can, still maybe have some control. But once you're in a U.S. Mexican security prison, you might as well be dead. Just drone strike them. For their point of view, it doesn't matter. So that's why they fight it. And then once they're there, they do nothing. And that's why the family members, because even the cartels are like, dude, we're not going to, maybe some lower level guys or the one-offs or here and there. Obviously, there's some aspects of that do happen. But from a grand scheme of thing, the cartels aren't going to do anything in the United States. Like, can you imagine, the U.S. government has somebody in witness protection and then a cartel member finds them and executes them? You don't think the U.S. government would be like, oh, that gloves are off, boy. You just went after one of our guys. We have to show you can't do this again. And that kind of is the issue. That's why they went to the U.S., because they understand they're going to be significantly safer than in Sinaloa. And it goes back to the conversation of power of Ivan Archibaldo, right? Right, because Ovidio Guzman, as part of this plea deal, got all his family members into the U.S. In the end of the day, what that means is Ovidio Guzman doesn't trust Ivan Archibaldo to protect their own family. He said, I need to send my family to the U.S. Ivan, I don't trust you to protect them. There's no way I can see Ivan agreeing necessarily to this because the optics of it was terrible, right? And so Ivan, even his own brother says, you're not strong enough to protect them. And it goes back to that original point. Something had to respond to it to show this, and I think that's why this announcement was done now.
It sounds, the more I learn through you, the more this sounds like organized crime than terrorism. Like, if I had to pick a bucket, and I know we've been hammering the terrorism piece recently for the designations and kind of open up additional resources against the cartels, but that concept of, like, they cross the border and they're safe, and why go after the Americans? Because you didn't say it exactly this way, but my takeaway was it's bad for business. That feels very organized crime. Does not sound ideological like a lot of these terrorist organizations.
Maybe the Knights Templar were the closest one to have an ideology. It was like this really cult-like Christianity. It's like really hard to explain. But I was literally I use this comparison. I'm going to use this comparison much more, and I'll say it here. Literally, how I view cartels, and I think this is how you don't view them necessarily organized crime only, because if you do that, you inherently think only illegal activities. And I've said they do legal. View them as a corporation who doesn't give a shit about laws. They are a corporation that, when you hear like these stories like, oh, I don't know, this oil company wanted to extract this oil here, but there was concern about whatever, so they created a front company, and all this, literally, that's the cartel. Just imagine a corporation with no morals, no concern about law, that operates in anywhere they can, and their number one priority is profit, and then they have kind of like they have their own private security to maintain control of everything, right? But that's how they operate. I mean, they are in a way corporations, and I think that would make more sense for kind of the listeners to understand, because then now the government corruption we talked about in the last episode would make more sense, right? Because it's kind of a both way street, right? And so that's where I would tell people, if you want to make this comparison, because the organized crime piece is accurate, don't get me wrong, but I think everybody goes back to, well, drugs,
all or nothing, yeah.
And it's like they do avocado, lime, timber, oil, water. Like the last sanction, one of the recent sanctions the U.S. did was against a CJNG leader in Tamaulipas, who was also the leader of a Gulf cartel faction there, they sanctioned him because he was stealing Mexican oil from the national oil company, Pemex. He was stealing it and shipping it into the U.S. through front companies. And so U.S. businesses were buying these oils stolen from the Mexican authorities, from the Mexican National Oil Company, through front companies, and they were being widely distributed in the United States. The same with avocados, right? Avocados don't get sent here illegally. They go through normal ports of entry with USDA inspectors. That the USDA inspectors have been targeted before by cartel members. That's why there was a ban on avocados a couple of years ago. And the cartel's like, oh, that was stupid. We want our avocados to go to the U.S., so let's not target the USDA inspectors. And again, it's like this whole view them as corporations that just operate as ever they see fit.
So if we are looking at them as a corporation, I like that comparison, and all these different profit centers. One of the profit centers, and you can tell me what percentage this makes up roughly, has to do with the southern border, whether it's human trafficking or drugs or any other illegal activity crossing the border. That is down substantially in the last few months. Pick your poison on what stat you go with, but like the one that I pulled here was that 90% decrease in apprehensions from a year ago. So like no matter what, there's more U.S. activity. There are likely fewer crossings. What does that mean for the business that is cartels?
So first, I think it's important to highlight that a lot of the human smuggling is not necessarily done by the cartel.
Okay.
They're actually, a lot of them are mostly done by local and family criminal groups that pay a fee to the cartel to operate.
Okay. So
right?
they're still involved. They still make money on it.
And just people like, yes, don't get me wrong. Like, let me just, before I get bombarded, yes, there are instances where cartels do human smuggling directly, but the vast majority of it is just basically these criminal groups, and there's like dozens, if not hundreds, that are all across the border, all across Mexico, and then they pay a fee to be able to push people. And it's actually interesting because sometimes in like Ciudad Juarez, for example, you'll see a lot of killings happening, and you kind of you look into it and go, this is not cartel versus cartel, it's human smuggling network versus human smuggling network.
Interesting.
And the cartel's like, whoever, just pay me. Like, I don't, whatever. So what I would say is it's kind of hard from a profit margin point of view to kind of analyze it. But what I would say is during the height of the Biden administration, when it was like people were going through the border, what I noticed was the priority and how I would track it is kind of like, I'm going to use this term, the marketing strategy of these human smugglers. Because they want people to see their success so that they can get more people and pay them, right? That's why social media plays a huge role. What it used to be was it was quantity. Just push people, push people, push people, push people, because at the end of the day, they'll get apprehended, and then they'll go through the immigration court system. We're done. Hoorah. We make money. Nobody cares. Then once the Biden administration, and then more so under the Trump administration, when we saw the agreements with Mexico go through and a lot of this was more clamping down, we saw what we've seen now is a switch from quantity to more quality. What do I mean by quality? Is the sophistication of getting people through. Now the objective is, I'm just going to get you the border so you can see a Border Patrol agent. Now my objective is, I'm going to make sure you're a getaway, that nobody sees you, that no Border Patrol has any idea that you crossed the border. And so what we see now is a switch to utilization of tunnels, way more though than the past, and the advertisement to use tunnels, and drones, to the point even where there's videos on TikTok. These guys have TikToks, and what they'll show you is you'll have a guy, for example, with the drone video like this, and he's looking, and then he has either like a radio or a phone, I don't know, but he's talking to the migrant, and the drone is following basically the migrant. And then the guy with the drone is telling him, okay, turn right, turn left, change your clothes. Okay, you're clear. You're good to go. Nobody's going to catch you, right? And so it's now this focus more on quality. What does that mean? Because the quality is higher, the price is higher.
Okay.
Right? The price is higher. And then secondly, though, even when we're talking about quantity, I think people need to understand that if you have apprehensions and you deport them immediately, the human smugglers don't care. There's more money for them.
Yeah. Charge again.
And that's
try
why
again.
It's kind of that very famous scene in Sicario. Just for people to understand, like Sicario 2, when they ask him what's more valuable, and it's like, it's the people. Because if you could deport them, and the cartels are like, sweet, you want to go again? Pay me? And so actually, that's kind of the issue we saw was, and I think this is kind of goes into our deportation policy, which was we didn't really, I don't think the US government does a good job of like properly analyzing this. Actually, in Tamaulipas, when the Gulf Cartel Civil War was the highest, right now there's a ceasefire between Scorpion Group and Metros. One of the stipulations of the ceasefire was respecting migrants, because what would happen was if a migrant, let's say, paid the Metros to smuggle him across the border, he would get detained, and then let's say he gets deported to Matamoros. Okay, well, that's not, now that's Scorpion Group territory. So the Scorpion Group would be like, you didn't pay me to go through the US, but you got deported here. Oh, you paid my rival. Okay, you have two choices. Well, three. One, you pay me whatever I tell you to pay me. Two, you're forced to work with me. And that's actually a lot of times when we see migrants fighting with cartels, it's because they have no other way to pay the extortion fee. So they're forced recruited by the cartels to make up for it. Or three, they just execute them. Right? And so part of the ceasefire agreement was, hey, if that happens, now the deal is, at least in that specific set, not across all the border, but at least there, if a cartel member they know that it's if Scorpion Group gets it and they know it's Metros, now they hand it off to the Metros, and they're like, okay, here, and that guy pays again and pays again and pays again. So, like I said, these are corporations. If profits go down, it's like marijuana. When marijuana is legal in the U.S., what do? They just shift it north into, now there's illegal form of marijuana in the United. They're corporations. They don't care. Boom, 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 and they shift and they adjust accordingly.
So do I understand this correctly, that if I'm kind of reading between the lines here, you're saying that during the Biden administration, when there were a ton of people coming across the border, we were tracking apprehensions, but a part of that was they were just trying to get literally like to run into a border patrol agent in the United States, because then the process would begin and they could just go off and do their own thing.
They would just dump. They would throw and throw and throw and throw people. If there's a border patrol agent, and that's why you saw a lot of in the border fences, they were just standing there, like the migrants would just stand there a lot of times until somebody would come up, right? Because for the human smuggler is like, we don't care if you get apprehended, because now it's a quantity piece. Push, 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 push. Now there's a quality piece to it, because people aren't going to pay for them to get deported per se. However, from a human smuggler perspective, let's say you do get deported. Hey, you got caught, man. That's on you. You want to go through again? Pay me more money or pay me the same, or maybe I'm even give you a discount. Like, who knows? Like, oh, you're a regular user of ours, 10% off. I don't know, but that's the thing. Yeah. That's the mentality. Again, it's I kind of bang my head with this, because it's like, I think it's like what people are like, everything we do, we can do one thing or one other. Obviously, there's something wrong when we have hundreds of thousands, not millions of people coming across the border. I'm not advocating for that, right? No. But this idea that, oh, well, numbers are down. Well, yeah, these are corporate. They just switch. They switch their business models.
I guess what I'm getting at there that's really interesting is this apprehension number ends up being a totally flawed metric to go off of, because the apprehensions did not matter according to the previous administration and their immigration policies. In fact, they were arguably looking for Border Patrol agents so they could start the process, whereas now the incentive is to avoid them. So we're using the same measure of success against two totally different strategies. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and again, it's any administration can have a policy, whatever the policy it might be. And I'm not trying to get into the politics of it. That's not what but I'm trying to say is these organizations will adapt, and I'm seeing them all adapt. They adapt and adapt and adapt. Hey, is the border, let's say, loose and we can get people through? Push.
Great.
Oh, it's harder, quality, get them getaways, and let's market that way. But now the cost is significantly higher.
Okay.
So now is the marketing strategy, let's target people with income that can pay these exorbitant fees, because if you want a drone to follow you, that's not cheap, man. That's not cheap. And maybe these are migrants that can't pay it and they still want to get across, right? And they're going to try, because I still see the rudimentary, simple way. Then what they do is, okay, well, let's just get them across. If they get caught and deported, we'll just tell them again, hey, you want to go over again, work for us, do something, give us money, you pay us, and we'll try it again. Because deportations for cartels are not bad. Mm-hmm. It's not a bad thing for them. It's more, okay, just you're giving me more people. Great. And so that's the thing. It's not the politics of it. Is that, again, view these organizations or corporations, wherever there's a hiccup or a problem or a success, they'll take advantage of it. And that's the thing. These are very adaptable organizations. And again, a lot of them are human smuggling networks that for all intents and purposes, I still see. Now, last point I'll end about the border, though, right, that I don't think gets talked to enough about is, look, if the United States really wants to clamp down on a lot of these illegal activities along the border, we got to look in house, right? Not only in the human smuggling networks, a lot of them are both sides of the border. Like, let's stop with this idea that it's only Mexico. I know for a fact of American citizens, by the way, a lot of American citizens are involved in this, but American citizens who don't even speak Spanish, who are involved in human smuggling networks, that have safe houses all across the board, and they operate, and they get raided by Border Patrol and ICE, etc., because they leverage that, or they operate in motels and hotels, etc. And even Airbnbs we've seen where they will rent an Airbnb, and the owner is like, "Why do I have like 30 people in my house in a border town? I'm going to call the cops," right? So there's an American piece to this as well that is very much required for successful operations in human smuggling. And two, also, like, look, guys, mad respect to every U.S. law enforcement, but there's corruption within the U.S. law enforcement, right? I was talking to a reporter in Mexico, and he was like, "Look, it's pretty interesting that a lot of times, even throughout the years, you see this." He was like, "I would notice that the human smugglers knew exactly when these border patrol agents would leave that area." Like, exactly to them, they knew exactly when they were heading out. And it's not just continuing observations, they prepared it. And we've seen, like, there has been cases of US CBP agents and Border Patrol agents being convicted for corruption. Recently, I think it was last month, a CBP agent was indicted for providing money. And because it's, again, these are corporations, where can they leverage this, pay money, and then that way they pay the people to just look the other way. Yeah. And maybe it's not a tunnel, it's not a drone, but it's a corrupt official. You could get people across. But again, if you're leveraging a corrupt law enforcement agent, you got to charge the migrants more to go through.
That's also where I think we end up back in the organized crime versus terrorism piece, because you don't see a lot of Al Qaeda or Islamic State bribing U.S. officials. Right, that's just not a thing. But I want to wrap up here by going back to the alliance piece. Do you see that move, and maybe if that ends up being a trend, as something that reduces the overall violence or increases it, or no impact at all?
I would say increases, because here's the reason why. Here's the reason why. I think the Sinaloa cartel civil war, obviously the violence skyrocketed. And it's kind of this idea, US, they want cartels to be weaker. We talked about this, I think, in the previous episode, but the Mexican government want violence to go down, right? So the problem is, I think that's why, from a federal government perspective, they had multiple reasons, but one of the key reasons I think they wanted the Chapitos done, and they supported the Mayito Flacos, is because we just want violence to be done. Let's just give it to one of them, right? Okay, here's the problem. Now you're introducing the Jalisco. Okay, so now the issue is, now these guys are going to fight. Now they have more of an incentive, and it's specifically one of the areas I'm looking at, not only necessarily Sinaloa as well, but Nayarit, because the Mayito Flaco has been doing an offensive in northern Nayarit. Now the interesting aspect, now they have kind of two areas where they might have concurrent offensive by these groups. So the violence is going to go up, because now Ivan Archibaldo is not weakened. He has an incentive to keep on fighting, and he's going to leverage the Jalisco New Generation to do that. So now the question I have is, how does the Mexican government respond to this dynamic? And is there now an understanding, maybe we need to switch to, either peacekeeping, where we're neutral? Do we support the Chapitos? Do we continue supporting Mayito Flaco? And that's something. But one of the key aspects that, to me, I don't know, but I would love to end on this point, and I think this is something to people to think about. I had this conversation yesterday in another channel, but it was like, how does the U.S. view this? Because now you made the most powerful cartel in Mexico significantly more powerful. And does that now change the calculations of the Trump administration and how they view Jalisco New Generation? And do they think, holy crap, this is now, that 800-pound gorilla? Because now you have the Chapitos, by the way, for those who don't know, one of the main reasons why the fentanyl crisis happened in the United States. There's a reason why during the Biden administration, they almost single-heartedly went after Los Chapitos, like obsessively after Los Chapitos. Because if there's one poster child for the fentanyl crisis in the U.S., Ivan Archibaldo. All them. You want one? Ivan Archibaldo. Now, Ivan Archibaldo just made a deal with El Mencho. right? And so that power dynamics that now happens now that the host country, does that change the American calculation? Say, okay, Mexico, this is getting out of hand. You need to, or does the U.S. say, we're going to start doing something about it because we can't have this? I don't know. I'm just speculating.
Yeah.
But to answer your question earlier, violence will go up. I'm just very interested in the U.S. government's response to it.
All right. Well, it's something we'll keep an eye on and maybe come back and talk about here in another couple of weeks. But Stefano, thank you so much, man. Every time we get into this, I feel like I learn a ton, and based on people's feedback, I'm sure they do as well. So we'll link all of your stuff, your Instagram, new TikTok, of course, X, and YouTube, as well as all the links to Arturius, where you're the Chief Intelligence Officer. But thank you so much again, and looking forward to doing this again, man.
Thank you so much for having me, Preston. It's always fun.
All right, so thank you again so much to Stefano for taking the time to come on and talk through all of this. I feel like he's so knowledgeable on this that every time we talk about anything cartels, it just kind of opens my eyes to how little I actually know, if that makes sense. So probably a good reason to keep following him and keep listening to what he has to say. Again, be sure to check out his accounts linked in the description below, along with some of his work at Arturius, and we'll be sure to invite Stefano again on here before too long. But that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.